All right, well, hello everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the VAEEC talk show. I am your host, Chelsea Harnish. Today, I'll be interviewing three guests about energy efficiency policy and program updates. Selma Kozik with Dominion Energy, Chase Counts with Community Housing Partners, and Nate Benferrado with the Southern Environmental Law Center. But first, let's review recent General Assembly and regulatory energy efficiency updates. This past session, the Senate defeated a bill that would have removed Virginia from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, a multi-state program to reduce carbon emissions, as well as a bill put forth by Governor Glenn Youngkin to prohibit utilities from implementing smart thermostat DSM programs. These bills died in committee on a party line vote. The governor's amended budget included a line item to remove $11 million from RGGI-funded energy efficiency programs for flood recovery in Southwest Virginia. The Senate version of the budget pulled those funds from the general fund, while the House version would have removed $18 million from RGGI funding for energy efficiency. The legislature adjourned in February without a deal on the budget and instead passed a skinny budget to appropriate public school funding after a budgeting miscalculation last year. The General Assembly reconvened last week to take up bills amended by the governor, but did not address the budget. Youngkin said last week that he will call a special session on the budget once the legislature brings him something. However, the General Assembly does not need to pass a budget this year since Virginia's biennium budget was passed last year. In other news, the State Corporation Commission, which oversees the approval of utility energy efficiency programs, among other things, is down to one of three judges. The General Assembly was not able to come to a consensus on appointing two new judges, despite a bipartisan bill passing both chambers, which would have allowed each chamber to choose a candidate for a term of 5 or 6 years. If the chambers cannot agree on new candidates during the upcoming special session, it will be up to the governor to make temporary appointments for the remainder of the year. Meanwhile, the commission has recalled Patricia West, a Republican appointee, to help Lone Commissioner Jamal Hudson review cases. And finally, the draft of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code is available for public comment through May 9th. This update nearly aligns with the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. The only two items not included are updated R values for wall insulation and requiring 3 air changes per hour. The VAEEC Building Code webpage has all of the details. And that's your energy efficiency legislative update. Now I am joined by our first guest, Selma Kozik, a program design consultant with Dominion Energy. Welcome, Selma.
Hi, Chelsea. Hi, everyone. How are you?
Great. So tell us a little bit about your role at Dominion as a program design consultant.
Sure. So before we jump into the market-based programs that our company currently offers, I'm going to take you from the start of the program design side, which is what I work on, into the actual where the program concept evolves into an eventual DSM program. So basically, on the program design side, within our energy conservation group, we work with stakeholders through the independent stakeholder meetings, subgroup meetings consisting of IAQ subgroups, new technology and energy conservation, public policy, and we listen. We're actively involved, and we listen to what the stakeholders are telling us in terms of any program improvements or enhancements that they would like to see in our current portfolio. With those suggestions, we then put a cohesive RFP together and go to the industry experts in the DSM field and solicit program design concepts and proposals for the suggested program recommendations. We give those prospective vendors about 6 to 8 weeks to provide us cohesive program designs, and then we start evaluating them for not only cost effectiveness, but also the ability to actually deliver this program as a DSM program. Once the modeling has been done, and for the time being, if the program is cost effective, We then file it in our annual DSM rider update proceeding. Once that's filed, we then go to a very robust discovery process and provide any additional detailed overview and input of the program design parameters, amongst many other things, for the prospective programs. Once the hearing has taken place, which in this year is in May, we then anticipate a filing in August. And then once the final order has been issued in approving those programs, we also on the program design side work with the contract negotiation in terms of with our supply chain and the successful vendor in order to get the launch process started. So that's what we do on the program design side. On the program operational side, just a quick overview. Once the terms and conditions and the contracts have been signed by both parties, then there's a robust IT risk assessment where our EMV vendor is involved in terms of exchanging and establishing BI data requirements for each program and all the various measures that are offered within each program. And that's then, that data can be collected and then is part of our annual EMV report. So there's a lot of backscene that goes on, but also a lot of front-end action items that need to happen before a program actually is approved. And then once it's approved, it takes a while for it to get started and running.
Great, thank you for that. Now, Dominion has launched dozens of new energy efficiency programs over the last 5 years, thanks in part to policies such as the Grid Transformation Security Act of 2018 and the Virginia Clean Economy Act of 2020. How many programs are you currently running?
So currently, with our recently approved 10 programs, we're over 40 DSM programs. And that also consists of with a large DSM portfolio, we offer 1,000 approximately program measures. So there is something for everyone out there. For every customer that's interested in participating, they can definitely find a measure.
That's great. Now, let's go into a deeper dive and tell us a little bit more about these programs. I know you have some slides to share with our audience, so let's go ahead and start with the residential programs.
Sure. And wonderful. Great. So, so before I jump into just giving everyone the, rather than going line item by line item of all the programs that we currently have in place, as many of you all know, we filed our long-term plan in our 2021 DSM proceeding. So the way we're trying to right now organize our DSM programs into 7 different categories. And the reason for that is to actually improve our customer awareness of the program, simplify the customer experience, and most importantly, simplify the customer enrollment. That way customers are able to participate in programs and get the necessary measures that they need and want. So we have our income and age qualifying sector, and that's very robust. We have numerous programs with various different measures that we offer. We also have a residential energy services category that consists of our customer engagement program, various audit programs, which includes the virtual audit, home energy assessment, the retrofit, and then we also have our manufactured housing multifamily. On our EE products, we offer the microplace, the EV chargers, water savings, and smart thermostat. We also have a residential new construction program. And we also currently we offer 3 demand response programs. And that's our water savings DR, our electric vehicle DR, and our thermostat DR.
Great. And we move on to non-residential programs.
Sure. So here we also try to simplify the process of how our non-residential customers could easily navigate our program offering website and figure out what type of program is more suitable for them. So we divided it into our large business solution segment a small business solution segment, and we have the non-residential new construction program. So we have something for every non-residential customer, whether it's demand range is 100 kW and below, or it's a medium-sized customer or larger commercial customer. They're able to participate in our lighting program, heating and cooling program, prescriptive, window film, just to name a few. We also have a non-residential engagement program, various building optimization and controls. So there's a large variety of program measures that we offer to our non-residential customers.
Great, thank you. And members of our audience today may be interested in being a program implementer or contractor. Do you have any advice for them on how they can learn more about that aspect of the programs?
Absolutely. So the first step would be to personally reach out to me. I'm happy to share my contact information. The way it would work is because we have such large portfolio of whether it's our residential or non-residential programs, we would then I would connect them to the appropriate program implementer and establish that connection where they can then attend a contractor orientation session if applicable for that specific program. And in most instances, that's where the real one-on-one happens in terms of the various paperwork that needs to be signed by attending the orientation, what the expectation is. And that's how there is a partnership established between the implementation vendor, the contractor, and us.
Great, that's helpful. And we will have your contact information on the last slide today. For those in the audience, we are just about ready for audience questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you. While folks might be thinking about their own questions that they want to ask, I will go ahead and ask my last question for Selma, which is, as a design consultant, so someone who is very familiar with the designing of all of the programs, do you have a favorite program or one that might be near and dear to you?
So this was a very tough, it's a very tough question because I think all of our programs are very unique in what they offer. But I do think that if I had to choose, I strongly believe that my favorite one is the marketplace program, our energy efficiency marketplace program, for numerous reasons. First one is it's online for customers, so there's the customer convenience, but we also offer rebates on numerous products ranging from Energy Star appliances such as air purifiers, washers, dryer, freezer, and then we also offer rebates for smart thermostats and EV chargers. So it goes from one spectrum to another. So there's something there for everyone. And I think it's overall a really, very generous program offering. And it's one of my favorite ones.
Nice. Okay, are there any questions for Selma? Feel free to type it in the chat or you can go ahead and raise your hand. Any questions? Andrew, you're coming on. Do you have a question for Selma?
Sure. I work primarily in the residential section, and I know the proposal to consolidate the home energy assessment program and the retrofit program still does not really provide any incentive for an actual home energy audit. It's still just incentives for measures. And in my opinion, that's a real barrier because the diagnostic energy audit, that's part of the requirement to access the rebates of the retrofit program, is costly and requires a licensed in Virginia. Was any thought given to, or might there in the future be a rebate for the actual audit rather than just for the measures? Because indeed the home energy assessment program is just rebates for measures, not compensation installer for doing an inspection.
For the audit. So Andrew, let me just rephrase to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. You're wondering if going forward, or have we considered actually incentivizing a customer for just receiving an audit from a qualifying contractor, correct?
Correct.
So yes, in the sense that when we went and we're getting ready, we haven't issued an RFP. So that's something, thank you for that feedback. And we will include this in our upcoming RFP for our DSM services, where we can explicitly ask the industry experts if they could provide a program design that would actually, that it includes certain measures that we already offer in our programs, and or just a program design. If there's a cost-effective program design, they could offer an audit. And we have done that in the past, and the market has come back with the audit. There is no incentive for the audit itself. You only receive an incentive by installing the measures. So it goes hand in hand. Correct. So you are unable to receive an rebate for the installed measures without actually receiving an audit. So that way you know what you're receiving and what you should be installing. But that is something that we can go back to the market to share around and re-ask the industry experts if they can provide us, what are they seeing across other utilities? Because that's actually a really good suggestion. We need that's something that we should definitely, and we'll revisit. So that's something, thank you for suggesting that. We'll ask the market, I'll ask the market again, I'll work with the vendors to see what they can do for us.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Andrew, for that question. We have time for one last question, if anyone would like to ask. Okay, not seeing anything. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Selma. We really appreciate you taking the time. All right.
Thanks, Chelsea. And feel free to pass along my contact for any inquiries.
I will. Your email address is on a slide that we'll put up at the end of the hour.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I am going to be joined by Chase Counts, Senior Director of Operations at Community Housing Partners and one of VAEEC's newest board members. Thank you for joining us today, Chase.
Thank you for having me.
Longtime attendees of VAEEC events are probably very familiar with CHP, but for those who may not be as familiar, can you give us a brief overview of the work CHP does?
Sure. CHP or Community Housing Partners. We're a 501c3 community development corporation, and CHP Energy Solutions is just one of our 3 service lines. Within Energy Solutions, we have a couple of different departments. We are first and foremost a weatherization assistance program provider. We're one of 14 weatherization providers in across the Commonwealth. We also have a contracting team, which manages relationships with about 90, actually a little over 90 trade contractors, primarily supporting our weatherization deferral repair program, which I know we'll talk about. We also operate what I call a boutique utility program implementation service, where we partner with all of our investor-owned electric and gas utilities in Virginia. We've also developed some programs with the electric co-ops and even some municipal utilities. And then we also operate one of the world's premier weatherization training centers, where we're headquartered in Christiansburg, Virginia. So across all of Energy Solutions, we have about 115 folks on staff operating across about 30 different programs and funding sources annually. We deliver services to about 75 to 8,500 households each year. And all of the programs and services that are provided to qualifying households come at no cost, 0 cost, completely funded through our federal, state, and utility sponsored programs.
Wow, CHP does a lot. What is your specific role at CHP?
So as Senior Director of Operations, I'm primarily charged with coordinating our contracting and utility programs teams in conjunction with our weatherization operations. So we kind of optimize the suite of services we can provide to each individual client, all in an attempt to reduce the individual's energy burden, the percent of their income that goes towards paying their utility expenses, intending to free up those expenses for other things, critical needs like housing and healthcare, childcare services. But one of the primary roles that I play in addition to supporting our staff is to also build and maintain relationships with key stakeholders like new funders, existing funders, advocacy organizations, outreach partners, and contractors in coordination with all of our staff.
Great. Well, in the last few years, weatherization providers across the state have seen demand for their services skyrocket due to the passage of strong climate and energy policy. Tell us how the passage of the Grid Transformation Security Act, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and Virginia's participation in RGGI has translated directly into demand for more low-income energy efficiency programs.
Yeah, so we really started with the foundation of Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program, and all of the policies that you mentioned really strapped our rocket ship onto the existing program. So the Grid Transformation Security Act 2018 directed the APCO and Dominion, in this case, the electric utilities, to propose just over $1 billion in utility-sponsored energy efficiency programs in Virginia over the next 10 years, and we're about halfway through that. And approximately, I believe it's 10%, maybe up to now 15% of the proposed program funds were to be directed toward income qualifying customers. So Dominion has been charged with proposing about $870 million worth of programs, while APCO, or American Electric Power, about $140 million. I think there's been some substantial progress made towards both those metrics, as you probably heard from Selma earlier. The Virginia Clean Economy Act kind of bolstered the GTSA by introducing the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard. So one of the things that stakeholders recognized was kind of missing from the GTSA were some savings targets to be incorporated with those spending targets. So I'm less familiar with the specifics, but I understand that APCO was charged with reducing their energy consumption by 0.5% in 2022 compared to 2019, and that would increase annually, and Dominion similarly, but at a rate of 1.25% in 2022 compared to 2019. The VCA also introduced Virginia to, well, in a unique way, to participate in full with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and through some successful advocacy with many folks on this call, we were able to establish, in partnership with Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, the Weatherization Deferral Repair Program. And the WDR program filled a really critical funding gap to support the weatherization network in meeting the increased demand for weatherization and energy efficiency services for income and age qualifying households. So prior to the WDR program, one of our other trade association partners, the Association of Energy Conservation Professionals and CHP, conducted a study in 2020 across all the weatherization providers, and we found that approximately 1 in every 5 weatherization applicants were deferred from services due to home repairs needed before energy conservation measures could be safely and effectively installed. So just to give a bit of perspective, in 2020 alone, CHP, again, just one of 15 providers at the time, had 197 deferrals that year. Since the establishment of the Weatherization Deferral Repair Program, this is starting July 2021, we've had fewer than 10 deferrals over that period of time. So the program is working, and
Definitely.
the program, the WDR program, allows for roof repairs, replacements, minor structural repairs, electric, plumbing, HVAC repairs, replacements. Oftentimes we'll come across hazardous environmental conditions, which may include potential mold, lead, asbestos, pest control issues. None of these things directly contribute to energy savings, but by being able to address these really critical needs, we're able to unlock that household's ability to participate in energy efficiency and weatherization programs. And since I'm still on this tangent, I'll just wrap up by saying CHP alone, again, just since July 2021, we've been able to serve 507 households. We have another 443 households in queue. Of those 507 households, we've supported approximately 1,800 repairs, unique repairs, utilizing a network of more than 40 trade contractors. And not only does the program enable clients to then go on to receive energy saving services, but what we're finding through our clients' feedback is that they shared with us that they didn't know how they would ever be able to remain in their family's home without these services. So we're now enabling these households, these families, to age in place and potentially warding off, contributing even more to Virginia's housing crisis.
That's amazing. And wasn't there a news article where one of your clients was interviewed, and at the end of the news article, she said for the first time in years, maybe in decades, she was able to hang and light up her Christmas tree and her Christmas lights for the year.
Yes, and I'll have to thank, I see Elizabeth McGowan on the line for sharing that story.
Yeah, it's an incredibly heartwarming story. As I mentioned in the legislative updates, there is some opposition to RGGI. There was an anti-RGGI bill during session. One thing that we hear from opponents of RGGI is that there are other alternative funding sources. In your expert opinion, are there alternative funding options for what RGGI does on the ground for your clients?
I respectfully would ask them to show us the money, because it's just not there. They might be referring to the in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law included for the first time through DOE's weatherization program, the Weatherization Readiness Fund. Excuse me. And that was funded to the tune across all of Virginia. Virginia would be allocated $270,000 for the Weatherization Readiness Fund to do effectively the same or comparable services as the WDR program. CHP will only see $74,000 of that. For perspective, we're investing usually approximately just over $10,000 per household to provide the corrections needed to then participate in weatherization. So that $74,000 may contribute to approximately 7 households that we can provide services to, compared to about 16 million through the WDR program annually.
Wow. Yes, that is apples and oranges for sure. So what do you think is on the horizon for CHP and the rest of the weatherization network? You did briefly bring up the bipartisan infrastructure law. We also have the rebates and money coming from the IRA. So can you talk a little bit about the federal funding opportunities, but if there are other things that are out on the horizon?
Yeah, lots of moving pieces, and waiting with bated breath to figure out how the Inflation Reduction Act may impact weatherization operations or our comparable or service providers, participating service providers. The bipartisan infrastructure law will introduce an additional 65 million, effectively kind of a stimulus to Virginia's weatherization program over the next 5 years. I mentioned the Weatherization Readiness Fund, which will support some home repairs. Of that 65 million and build funds that will go to Virginia, 15% of those funds, are about just under $10 million, can be used for training and technical assistance, which should support bolstering our service provider network. In fact, building out our contractor network is one of our top priorities this year. I'm happy to see a few familiar faces, names on this call, like Michael Flanagan with Quick AC Quote and Tran Energy. Have been tremendous partners in helping us build out our capacity to continue driving these services to income qualifying households.
I'm glad you brought that up. As we see an increase in demand, the next question is, well, where do the bodies come from to help meet that demand? I think that workforce development is going to be critically important if we want to see successful deployment of these federal dollars. And it sounds like CHP is already thinking about that, and so I think that's great.
Absolutely. I should also mention for folks that may be interested, that we are hosting, in conjunction with Department of Housing and Community Development, Virginia's first weatherization interchange in person since the pandemic, this June 12th through the 16th in Virginia Beach, convening of all weatherization agencies and hopefully several of our contractors to participate in some technical training and just regrouping, reconvening as we get ready for the next generation of weatherization in Virginia.
That's great. I think an in-person opportunity to see each other after 3 years is going to be really great. And I know that networking is always the best part and what people enjoy the most of our events. So I think that in-person piece is critical. That's good. Well, I want to see if there are any questions for Chase. Go ahead and raise your hand, turn your camera on, or put something in the chat if you have any questions for Chase. Meanwhile, I'll go ahead and ask you my last question, excuse me, because you did bring up COVID. I'm just curious, how has CHP and maybe the rest of the weatherization network navigated this need for accelerated expansion, but at the same time, it's on the heels of the pandemic. It sort of feels like the timing is off, but how have you all been able to navigate that?
We were fortunate enough to only kind of shut down operations for about 5 weeks while we developed our COVID safe work protocols back when everything hit in 2020. But honestly, a lot of credit has to be given to our Vice President, Mark Jackson, for his strategic planning. Everything from vehicle procurement, ordering additional equipment, seeing that we had programs like with Dominion Energy, our HVC program, as well as our APCO programs, which would enable a lot more heat pump replacements. We were able to procure a lot of those materials in advance before the supply chain issues really took hold. So it's partially planning, partially good luck. And since about January 2021, we were only about a staff of 45 or so. And we recognized that there was going to be a substantial need to grow. I mentioned we're at 115 now, and we grew through providing competitive wages, and specifically for our field staff, our crew technicians, our crew leaders, energy auditors, and field superintendents. We created a career ladder to provide clear milestones for their career progression and how their compensation would be impacted by participating in different training, hours on the job. And that's gone a long way to building out our staff. Yeah, I can leave it there. There's a lot of other things we've been doing in the background too.
That's great. Any questions for Chase? Andrew says in the chat, assuming Reggie funds stay in place, how are you considering integrating IRA tax credits and pending rebates? Great question, Andrew.
I would love to be able to provide an answer. I think I see Bettina on the call, and she may be better suited to address that question, not to put her on the spot, but hoping to figure that out as rebates are anticipated to come online in 2024.
Yeah, I think we're all waiting for that guidance to come out, hopefully early this summer. I had a similar thought because you had mentioned replacing heat pumps, and there are obviously rebates for doing such things. So hopefully the two will be integrated so that the homeowners that you work with are able to utilize both. And then Andrew's second question was also, even with all these funding sources, what additional resources, financial or otherwise, are needed to expand your reach and meet this need or demand?
I'm so glad you asked this question, Andrew. So I mentioned we have about 30 different funding sources that we're operating, and each of those programs has their own administrative intake and their maybe slightly different eligibility requirements, different tracking and reporting requirements. So one of the things that we've been working on in the background is overhauling our internal infrastructure. We've developed over the last about 16 months an internal energy solutions support team that owns our technology stack, that has implemented a new customer relationship management software program. We've overhauled our field data collection processes through a program called GoForms, and we've consolidated our client intake and established a client advocacy service for our clients. But all that is to say, we're attempting to consolidate all of the different programs and services to just provide a single program that we can present to both our clients and our contractors to help get the word out, clear the confusion about what program may be able to cover which measure. We just want to have a single program, tell our contractors and service providers, you know what the clients need, tell us what they need, and we'll figure out the different funding sources behind the scenes to make it happen.
Great. Well, we are out of time with you today, Chase, but I think that all sounds really amazing. I hope that CHP will be able to maybe show that program to the rest of the provider network. If they are interested in that, it seems like that would be a great opportunity to streamline all of that work. When you said you're administering 37 programs, I just thought, oh, all those invoices.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us, Chase. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chelsea.
And our last guest today is Nate Benferrato. He's a senior attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. Welcome, Nate.
Hi, Chelsea. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So SELC has litigated a variety of environmental issues in Virginia and throughout the Southeast. What are your specific focus areas as a senior attorney?
Yeah, so Southern Environmental Law Center is a public interest law firm. We are a nonprofit organization and do lots of work across the 6 Southeast states that we work in on climate issues, air, water, transportation, land use, wildlife, all sorts of issues in these states. I work in Virginia. We're headquartered here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I help lead up our energy team, focusing on energy issues in Virginia. So within that, we do a lot of work at the State Corporation Commission with utility dockets. I work a lot in the energy efficiency space in those dockets, the DSM cases, and a lot of other dockets too, involving both Dominion and Appalachian Power and others. We also do work at the General Assembly to help advance policies there. Lots of regulatory work. And one of the biggest things on my plate right now is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And so personally, I've spent a lot of time getting that process through the regulatory rulemaking process, also at the General Assembly, and helping to implement it. Chase already talked a little bit about one part of that, the weatherization deferral repair program. And now we're in a process of a potential rulemaking to repeal that. So that's sort of the work I do in a nutshell, and a lot of it right now is focused on it.
So a lot is happening right now in your world. So as yes, we just talked to Chase about how the RGGI funding is making a difference on the ground for low-income Virginians. And as I've previously mentioned, there is opposition, and as you just referred to, Governor Youngkin does want to pull Virginia out of RGGI by the end of the year, which is when our contract is up for renewal. Can you tell us more about what is happening on the regulatory side of RGGI over the last year?
Sure, yeah. I may just take 30 seconds just to put us on the same page in terms of what RGGI is. It is a kind of a proven model to reduce emissions. It takes a very similar framework to how we kind of got acid rain under control in the US in the 1990s. So it doesn't ban the combustion of fossil fuels at power plants, but it basically says, if you continue to burn fossil fuels, for every ton of carbon dioxide that comes out of the smokestack, you now have to have one of these allowances. And that's sort of the structure and the way in which it reduces power plant emissions. That is the primary purpose of RGGI, to reduce power plant emissions. The way it reduces is it reduces the available supply of allowances every year. So if a state participates in RGGI, they have a set amount of allowances that are auctioned off every quarter, and each year that amount is reduced. And that's how it's driven down emissions very effectively. In states that have been participating since the very beginning, they've essentially slashed their emission by 50%. And if you look at what was happening in Virginia before we got into RGGI, for the period 2010 to 2020, our emissions from power plants were basically constant. Some slight fluctuations up and down in any given year, which can be from any number of factors. Weather is a big one. But overall, our emissions were pretty constant. And in the first 2 years of participating in RGGI, so we officially began participating in RGGI in 2021, over the first 2 years, our emissions are down over 16%. So we're starting to see some real progress, which makes sense. We can see how the other states that have been participating since the beginning, and this is very consistent with their experience. So we're seeing some real progress in terms of reducing emissions. Now, it took a long time for us to get into RGGI. There was an early regulatory process that eventually actually got put on hold in 2019. So the Air Board, who has the sort of final say over these sorts of regulations, approved the original version of the program, got put on hold through a budgetary restriction that prevented DEQ from implementing the program. But then in 2020, the General Assembly passed a law called the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act. And that law did a number of things, but foremost, it directed DEQ to sort of tweak the original program that was sitting there but unimplemented, tweak it, allow Virginia to auction off these allowances, and it required DEQ to issue the regulation, the RGGI regulation, tells exactly the state treasury how you're supposed to use the funds, including for the low-income energy efficiency programs. There's a lot of requirements in that law. And so after that law was passed, DEQ did what it was told to do, issued the regulation, and we started participating. Where we are now is that the administration has basically issued a proposal to repeal the regulation. And the process we are in right now is before the Air Board, and there's a number of administrative process procedure steps that have to be taken. We went through what the first stage, which is called a notice stage, a notice of intended rulemaking action. There was public comment there. The vast majority of public comments during that phase was against the repeal proposal and really supportive of RGGI. And then they put out the proposed repeal for public comment. That's the next phase. And there were 60 days of public comment, which wrapped up in the end of March. And again, we see very strong support for RGGI, staying in RGGI, and a lot of opposition to the administration's proposal. And that just wrapped up. And so now we are in, the timeline is a bit uncertain. The administration has said they want to be done. They want to be out of RGGI by the end of this year, 2023, so that beginning January 1, 2024, Virginia would not be selling any more allowances. There would not be revenues coming in. Power plant owners would not have to buy these allowances anymore. There would basically be 3 years of Virginia in RGGI, and then we'd be out. Right now, DEQ has to prepare responses to the public comments, has to essentially prepare a board package, which will at some point be presented to the Air Pollution Control Board, and they will take a vote about whether or not to move forward with this proposed repeal. If they do vote in favor of the proposed repeal, there are still a few more steps that have to happen. And there will be, there's some review steps that have to happen from the governor's office, from the AG's office, various sort of back office kind of reviews that have to happen, and then it would be published in the Virginia Register and become effective. So right now we are waiting to hear what when the Air Pollution Control Board might take up this action, and we'll be following it very closely. Like I said, RGGI we're already seeing some very positive results in terms of Virginia's participation and in terms of emissions reductions. And I won't rehash everything that Chase said, but we're also seeing the value that this program provides in terms of consistent funding for some really important programs. So the energy efficiency is a full 50% of Virginia's RGGI allowance sales. And then the other big piece is 45% goes to the community flood fund, which is providing dollars to localities in ways that were never before possible. This consistent funding to allow the localities across the Commonwealth to do resiliency planning and then start to execute those resiliency projects. There's a huge need for this across the Commonwealth, not just on the coast, but inland communities too, which we are experiencing. Every year now we're having several of these events, these crazy rainstorms that are really having some devastating flooding impacts. This resiliency type of work allows localities to get the expertise they need to address these problems and get some preventative measures in place.
Yeah, my understanding is that we are the only RGGI state, Virginia is the only RGGI state that dedicates 50% of its funding to energy efficiency. And I think that's critical because as we hear opponents make the argument that, RGGI is expensive for consumers, which I think you and I both wholeheartedly disagree with. But the point is that that's why it's so great that we put so much money into energy efficiency. I think as everyone on the call knows, because energy efficiency helps those with high energy burden, as Chase has already mentioned, reduce those energy bills. So the people that might have trouble with an extra dollar or two on their bill, they are getting the services that they need to overcome that.
Yeah, there was a recent study that came out about specifically on the energy efficiency side. And I think it's so important that all of those energy efficiency dollars are directed to low income households. I think that's a sector that is really needs that extra help. for many reasons, but just looking at all of the available energy efficiency programming, whether it's a utility sponsored program or others, that really is a huge gap that RGGI is helping to fill. And if we stay in RGGI through 2030, which in our view is required by law, but if we stay in there, this study said we can weatherize, 100,000 to 130,000 homes, save low-income households on average over $600 a year. So it's furthering the goals of RGGI by reducing the energy needs and helping the people that need the most help, really that don't have the ability to make these repairs and become eligible for the federal weatherization program otherwise.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, with the resiliency side, these dollars are also going across the state. VAEC, we track where all of the money is being spent, and it is being spent from Abington in far southwest Virginia to Arlington to Shenandoah Valley to the Eastern Shore. It really is literally covering the full footprint of the state. I wanted to go back to the regulatory timeline for just a moment. The one thing I haven't heard you mention yet is litigation for RGGI. My understanding is that there is only a specific time at which point litigation could happen. I was muted the whole time.
No, I heard most of it, just the last second.
That's weird that it muted me. Can you talk a little bit about, so in terms of litigation on RGGI on this regulatory piece, my understanding is there's a specific trigger that needs to happen for litigation to be available. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So this process is governed by Virginia's version of the Administrative Process Act, which governs all sorts of rulemakings and permit issuance by agencies across Virginia. Typically, you have to wait until essentially the process is complete, and that's defined in the statute of basically when you can challenge something if you think it's not lawful, and that for a rulemaking like this, a regulatory process is when the regulation itself is essentially published and effective. So that's usually the date under the code. Now, I can't predict the future. I don't know what the Air Board is going to do. I don't know what DEQ is going to do. I hope personally that the administration will really take a hard look at the public comments, the very strong public support for staying in RGGI, for the funding that RGGI is providing, and potentially rethink this proposal. I think this is a really popular program that is helping Virginians right now, all across the Commonwealth in so many ways. Air quality, we are improving our air quality, improving public health. We're getting these dollars out to struggling families to help them reduce their energy burdens. We're helping localities deal with flooding issues. It is such a successful program. I really hope the administration will rethink this process.
Yes, definitely. Well, we only have a few minutes left. If you have a question for Nate, please raise your hand, come off mute, or type it in the chat. We do have a question for you in the chat from Elizabeth McGowan. What role can the General Assembly play after the Air Board makes its decision? Would the General Assembly have to wait until next session, or could it call a special session? I believe only the governor can call a special session, right?
That I'm not totally sure on. I will sort of a tangential question or answer. The General Assembly, for 2 years now, there have been proposals to repeal the statute, which is how we came into RGGI, and those have not succeeded. In our view, that is what is required. This is required by participation in RGGI is required by statute. And so if you disagree with the policy, then that is how you need to change the policy through statute, through the General Assembly. And until that happens, our view is that we need to keep participating in RGGI.
Thank you. And last question from Andrew. Besides RGGI, what are you paying particular attention to, or what's the second most important legislative legal issue in your mind that EE advocates should pay attention to?
That's a tough one. There's a lot going on. One thing that I think is going to be really important. So the Virginia Clean Economy Act, this is in terms of utility sponsored programs, sets forward energy efficiency, standards, and it's set in terms of 2019 retail electricity sales, and they were trying to increase, and I think that was a great piece of legislation. But the statute itself only sets those standards out until 2025, and then it's going to be up to the State Corporation Commission to set new standards going forward. And so I think we really need to make sure we are setting, providing information to the commission. We're not quite sure how this process is going to work, whether they're going to set up a new docket or whether it's going to be part of the DSM proceedings that happen every year. But I think it's really important that we really get the information the commission needs to set challenging standards, but achievable standards. And that's the balance we really need to hit, because we know how important energy efficiency is to our clean energy future. It is the best way to serve electricity needs. Customers get to do exactly what they were doing before, but use electricity for it. It helps out the participating customers. It helps out everyone else by lowering overall rates. So it's a huge part of what we need to do, and we need to continue to push the ball there.
Absolutely. That was going to be my answer as well. The VCA goals, energy saving goals post 2025 are critical, which is why only having one SCC commissioner currently on the commission greatly concerns me. And I hope that it will be addressed in the special session that we keep hearing rumors about. So with that, thank you so much, Nate, for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. With that, here is all of the contact information for our speakers. Please feel free to reach out to any of them with questions. And thank you again to Selma, Chase, and to Nate for coming on and answering questions and just talking about these important policy initiatives that are happening in Virginia. One last announcement I wanted to just make is we do have a couple of important dates coming up. We do have 2 vacancies on our board, and applications, if you're interested in applying, those are due April 21st. Because of the way our bylaws are set and because of the 2 who formerly held those seats, we can only accept applications from not-for-profits, which includes local governments, nonprofits, electric co-ops, but so anyone that is not a business entity. And then lastly, our spring forum is set for May 23rd. It will be at the Eastern Recreation Center in Henrico County. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Registration for that is currently open. And with that, thank you again for joining today. I hope that this was helpful. It's always great to chat with a variety of different people about everything that's happening. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.